Hi, here are 20 n8n game changers that every AI builder needs to know. So, starting with number one, using the Think node and MCPs. So, let's start with the Think node. So, the Think node is a node here in n8n that's usually used with AI agents. And what's really cool is it gives your AI agent the ability to think and reason without using any reasoning models as the chat model. And how it does that is, let's say you give it an instruction or something to do, it really takes its time and breaks that down into steps just to figure out the right course of action before then making a decision. And for me, I found is especially useful for the times that maybe the AI agent didn't get sufficient enough data or is just really confused or not sure what to do. So its next steps will be to use the instructions that it was given to break that down logically, come up with a course of action, and then execute. So it really helps with the problem solving of the AI agents. So I really recommend using this in your AI agents. It helps a lot. So coming here, we can see our Think tool, which you can just connect to your AI agent. So coming back to MCPs in n8n are one of the most powerful tools that you can add to your AI agent because kind of how I see it is like an all-in-one. You can get access to many tools using just one MCP server. And there are many MCP servers out there, tens and thousands of them. So you can just select the MCP server you need for your use case and then use that in your AI agent. Because how we do this before, if you really wanted to perform powerful things with your AI agent, you'd have to configure a lot of sub workflows, configure a lot of APIs, HTTP requests. But with this, you can get access to a whole load of tools with just one node, which saves you a lot of time and also makes your AI agent very powerful because it can just select the one that it needs for that particular task. So I say it's something that you should be definitely looking into. For our next n8n game changer, we have number two, using Open Router as a chat model. So over here in our AI agent, we can see that we have Open Router connected as a chat model. And one thing about Open Router is the easiest way to get access to multiple different AI models. So there you can have access to free models, cheap models, models that we know, unrestricted models. Because here on n8n, we have the basic standard ones. We have OpenAI, Anthropic Cloud, Google Gemini, things like that, DeepSeek. But there are other models that exist out there that you may want to test out, or maybe you're just looking for something that's more cost effective and you can play around with. So coming here to Open Router, we can see different models like we have Inception, Mercury, Moth, Mistral, Minimax, Google, Kimi, OpenAI, DeepSeek. So there are really a lot of variety of AI models that exist out there, but we're not able to use them. But using Open Router, you can get access to anyone that exists. We can see this one is free, and there are also some that are low costing, or maybe ones that have higher amount of tokens that you can send. So you can always test around with this. But I think one really cool thing about Open Router, let's use Claude for an example. So I'm going to search up the Cloud Opus 4. So one thing is that when you use it on n8n, you just get access to the one provider, right? So let's say you're using Claude Opus 4, you only get access to the provider from Anthropic. But one really cool thing with Open Router is here we have three providers. So let's say Anthropic crashes, then it redirects you to another provider. So you use Amazon Bedrock, that one crashes, uses Google Vertex. So your workflow never crashes because you always have a lot of backups that you can use at every point. But if you're just using that single one, if it crashes, it's crashed and it crashes your whole workflow, which might not be ideal, especially when you're working with clients. So that's just why I love Open Router. And I'd suggest that everyone should be using Open Router for their AI agent. So coming to our n8n game changer number three, we have error workflows. So here we can see this native n8n error trigger, which is basically automatically triggered anytime there's an error in your workflow. And why this is very important, especially when you're working with clients. So let's say you build something for a client and there's an error inside. You don't want them to always have to call you and be like, oh, hey, this thing you built is not working, it crashed. Oh, why did I pay you so much money if it's crashing, stuff like that. So you want to have a way to message yourself and tell yourself, oh, this crashed, and then you can fix it as promptly as possible. So coming here, we have this error trigger. And one thing about the error trigger is you can have it in your workflow or you can have it in a separate workflow and then connect it to your workflows. So this is what it looks if it's inside your workflow. And just to show you what it looks in an external workflow, coming over here, we can see we have this in an external workflow. I call that error learning flow. And here we have the error trigger, which triggers when there's an error. And for me, I send myself a message on Discord. So that message basically have things like the workflow, and then you can say the workflow name that failed, and then it will tell you the error message as well as the execution ID and the last node that it failed on. So where the error occurred, which can really help in debugging the issues that it has and is really effective as well. So you should always have this in every workflow you're doing, especially when it's in production or when you have given it to a client. So just to show you how you can connect this to your workflow, especially when it's in a separate workflow. Coming back to this, if you are in a separate workflow, you just have to go here to these three dots. And then when you come here, you're going to see settings. You want to click on settings. And here in settings, we can see error workflow. And you simply want to select that workflow that has the error on it. So you're just going to connect this. And then you save that as well. So that is very important. And then anytime a workflow that you did that in has an error, it automatically called that one and you would get the notification that there's a problem in that. But coming to our number 4 here for n8n Gamechangers, we have continue on errors. So that's kind of another way to handle errors in this node. And now every node in n8n has this. So you have this thing in the settings tab that says on error. And you can basically see we have stop workflow, continue using error output. So what stop workflow means is if ever there's an error in that workflow, it just stop it. Everything's going to crash. And then continue basically means that it's just going to continue the workflow and pass on whatever that error was as an input for the next node, or just give it out as an output. And continue using error output is going to give you another branch that says error. Then the error is going to flow through that branch. So I'm going to show you how I usually handle this. So I usually use continue using error output, and I link that back to my error trigger so it can tell me, oh, this is what happened as well. So I'm just going to delete this try again over here. And there's this thing called stop and error. So we'll look for the stop and error node. And what this node basically does is it helps you in your own language write what error happened. So here I can write error in Telegram node. And then it just configures that if there's ever a trouble in this node, it will just send in the error workflow, there's a problem with the Telegram node. So I know exactly where the error happened and I can promptly go and fix that. For our game changer number 5, we have timeout workflows. So usually how that works is, let's say you have a workflow that is maybe stuck and it's just taking so much time to run, which is not meant to do. So usually sometimes we're using like really expensive AI models, or we're just really trying to save down our costs. So anytime that's happened, we don't want to waste all our money. We don't want this to keep running forever. So we just want to kill that process or stop that process. So to be able to use this timeout workflow, you come here to the three dots and you go to settings, and then you can set out a timeout workflow and you just toggle this green. And here you can specify after how many minutes, hours, seconds you want this to stop running if it ever gets stuck. And that is very important because sometimes you may build something that has like a lot of data, and that data is just making the API run so slowly, which is still costing you money, but you don't want to be spending that much because it could even have a timeout on the API. So you lose that money and you don't get your results either. So this is very important. So make sure if you're ever doing anything like that, you make sure you toggle this on and set it up. For our n8n game changer number 6, we have the schedule trigger. So I know a lot of people use the schedule trigger on a regular. And one thing is that we have all these defaults here. So we have seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, but those don't really help us customize custom times that we might want our workflow to work. But we have this extra one called custom cron, which can look a bit weird at the beginning because like looking at this, you're like, oh, what does this mean? But it is very powerful and can really help you make your timings very customizable. So here we have the 06 to 23. So that basically means from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then it only runs from Monday to Friday. But I know this looks probably really complex, but we have this here, Chrome tab Guru. So there you can find the expressions that you can use for that and get the same amount of customizability. So we have every 1 minute, we have every Friday at midnight, every year. So I really advise that you use this because I know sometimes we set up multiple triggers, which can just make the workflow really messy. But with this cron, we're able to get the same amount of customizability. So definitely use this. It will save you a ton in the long term. And coming to number 7, we have the ability to pin data and mock data. So here in our workflows, we have the ability to pin the data that we've gotten back from maybe an HTTP request or like anything else. So we don't have to constantly run the API or constantly call a trigger. Because I know, for example, let's say in our first example here with the AI agent, we have a Telegram trigger. So to start this, obviously you have to send a message on Telegram. So if you want, you can just pin whatever data you usually get back from the trigger here and then just run it multiple times. So you don't always have to send that same Telegram message over and over and over again, having to like switch tabs and come back and all that. So that is really helpful. Also in the terms of like just using like APIs, because obviously calling some APIs do cost money. So if you're like testing, you're like really trying to like put your workflow together, it's not advisable to keep spending and keep spending when you've not yet gotten it right. So just pinning data is a really effective way to do that. And all nodes have that. It just looks like this. You see like a little pin and you just tap pin data. So just to show you more how that works, let me just unpin that and run this workflow. And we can see that this runs correctly. So if we tap on this and we look inside, we can see all the data that we have. And coming over here, we can just pin that data. So we never lose the data. And this exact data that we got it from the API once, we can use to keep testing until our workflow is good to go. And then the next thing we have is mock data. So let me just come here to our schedule trigger. So you can do this in triggers, you can do this in different parts of your workflow. So that basically means putting in simulation data into your node just to help simulate how that would work. So that usually works maybe when you're still trying to ideate. So here, if you click on this pencil button here, it gives you this mock data. So it just gives you your own example of some data they have. And you can always change this. You can put this as query and you can put a question here or whatever you need just to run your workflow. And those will look like, let me just save this. Those will turn into schema objects that you can just drag and drop in other parts of your workflow and use it as well to test out your workflow. Now for number 8, we have save credentials for API calls. So this is very important, especially if you're going to be sharing a workflow that you've built with someone else, or maybe you're integrating it for a client and you maybe use yours in the beginning and you're just sending it over to them for them to be able to configure it, or just for your own comfortability. Let's say that's an API that you use often and you just want to save those credentials so you don't have to set up everything over and over and over again. How we do that is, let's say here in this HTTP request, just ignore some of the stuff here. So looking here, we have the header auth. So usually how you do this, if you did not configure it this way, is you'd have to toggle send headers true. And here you would have to type something like authorization. And down below, you'd have to put the value as bearer and then your API key. So if you were to send that over to someone else as a JSON file, everything will still be in there. So you'd have your API key exposed, which is not good. You should not be exposing your API key. And if you do have any API keys that are exposed, make sure you delete them afterwards so they're not accessible. So what we want to do is just make sure we set it up like this. That way, when we send it off to someone else, it is not configured. And how you set that up is you come here, you go to generic credential type, you set this as header off, and then you just want to create a new credential. And here you can basically put the same thing, authorization, and we'll just put in any value as our API key. Let's say this is our API key. And I'm just going to save this as demo and save. And we're going to turn off the headers. And next, I also want to share something with you that I find really important, especially when setting up HTTP requests with API calls. So we have this thing called rate limiting. So rate limits are basically how APIs work. So basically, APIs can only handle a certain amount of requests per minute and send back replies to certain amounts of requests per minute. So usually you want to not overwhelm the API or have the API provider fail on you because you're sending it too much requests than it can handle. So to enable rate limiting, you want to do something called batching. To do batching, you come here to add options and you select batching. So that basically sends just a little chunk of all your data per second or like per minute, however you want to set it up, to the API call. So you never really overwhelm the API. So here we're sending 50 items per batch and it's sending every 1 second. So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So you can always change this to 10,000 or just play around with this, make it a minute, just to make sure that the API never crashes on you and you're always good to go. And coming to number 9, we have the execution tab. So for me, I see the execution tab as very important. So it's just here right beside editor, the place that says execution, because it helps you see how your workflow ran at a specific point in time. And it not only shows you that, it shows you the exact data that went through the workflow. And it really helps when you're debugging. So let's say you had a couple errors, like it worked before and now it's crashing. It can really help you see what changed between the workflows and help you debug better. And if something like this ever happens, let's say you had a workflow you just saved and you were working on it a bit, adding some new features, and then for some reason, maybe you X'd out by mistake and you forgot to save, or maybe your laptop shut down, or any scenarios that can just cause you losing that new addition to your workflow, you can always come back to the last succeeded workflow and then copy that to your editor and just continue from there. So it could also be a big time saver. But I think the most valuable thing here would be getting to see your data, how it interacts at specific points in your workflow. So coming to our game changer number 10, we have keyboard shortcuts. So our first keyboard shortcut is the equal sign. So how that works is, let's come here to our AI agent. And instead of having to click on fix and expression, I'll just take this to fix. I'll take this out. So right now this is on fixed. And if you want to put this to expression, we just click on the equal sign and it automatically switches to expression. So then we can drag and drop. So that is number 1. For number 2, we have Ctrl S to save, or Command S if you're using the Mac. We also have Command Z to undo. So let's say, for example, I deleted this node by mistake. I can just do Ctrl Z and it comes back. I can just connect it again. Really helpful. And we have Ctrl A to select everything. So coming here, we just do Ctrl A, or Command A in my case, and it selects everything, but not just everything here. It selects actually everything in the whole workflow area. So that's just how that works. Really helps if you want to move things around and you just don't want to be dragging them one by one, and you don't want to do like this highlighting thing as well. For our next one, we have the Ctrl C, which is to copy. So I can just copy this and paste it back. And for Ctrl V, that's how we paste it back. So Ctrl V is to paste, Ctrl X is to cut, and then you can do Ctrl V as well to paste it back. And we have this called D and P. So earlier we spoke about how you can pin data. So here, if you want to deactivate a node, that is, you don't want that node to work, you don't want it to be active in the workflow, you just click on D and that deactivates that. And if you want to reactivate it, you click on D again. And also the same thing with pinning data. So we can just come here to this HTTP node, and if we click P, it unpins the data. If we click P again, it pins the data back. And we have enter. So if you click on a node and you just want to open it real quick, you just click on enter, it opens like that. And our next shortcut is Command or Control Enter. So what that basically is that you don't have to always click on this button here to run a workflow, or you don't have to come here and run a workflow. You can literally just click Control Enter like this, and it runs the workflow, which is super helpful as well. Our next one is Shift S, which is just to add a sticky note. So you just click on a spot on the canvas and you just do Shift S, and we have our sticky note added over there. And next we have F2, which is to rename nodes. So personally, in some workflows, I like to rename the nodes, especially if I have the same node kind of scattered across, just to know what that node does and to better help me understand what is happening along the way. So you can use the shortcut F2 as well to do that. And also, if you like videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Everything I'm going over here today will be in the resources in the description, so make sure you check those out. So for tip number 11, we have organization. So here we have a sticky notes. And as you can see around this workflow, I have sticky notes everywhere, which is just a way that you can use, especially when you're in the brainstorming ideation phase, or maybe just to help yourself stay organized and just know what everything is doing at what point. Or if you're sending it off to someone else, you can give instructions on how they can configure it. So there are many uses for sticky notes here. And to open it, we just have to double click on the sticky notes. And here we can just write whatever we need in the sticky notes. But one thing we have to note is that the information written here in the sticky notes is written in Markdown. So I know not everyone would have a lot of knowledge about Markdown. So what you can do, you can just write out what you want to put in the sticky notes and then just put that in ChatGPT to format that for you in Markdown, and you can just paste it there. It works exactly the same. And then for the next organization tip is just like renaming your nodes. So just to help you, especially when you're having nodes that have the same thing, just rename them so you know what each one does. And last thing here for organization is tags. So you can add tags to your workflows just to keep yourself better organized. You can maybe, let's say if you're doing something for this client, you can be like, oh, workflow for this client, or maybe this is an AI agent, just to better help yourself be organized when you're using n8n. And for game changer number 12, we have human in the loop. So basically how this works is when you're running your workflow, you can ask a human at a certain point for their opinion before going on to the next step. So that usually is in the form of approvals and disapprovals. So you can approve the step. So how I usually like to do this is, especially let's say for this scenario, we want to post something to LinkedIn and we're using an AI agent to draft out that post. So maybe we don't want to just post whatever the AI agent is giving us. We actually want to look over that and see if we'd like that to continue with the next steps. So what that usually looks like is here you go to the plus sign and you search for human in the loop. So you can have different types. We have Gmail, Discord, Google Chat, Microsoft Slack. So that basically just alerts a human to make a decision before the workflow continues. So coming here to set that up, you want this to have a response type. And there are different types of response type. We have approval, free text, custom form. So you can send the user any of these to get their approval for the next steps. And usually I like to use the approval one. And then we have the type of approval, which can be approve and disapprove. And you can always customize this to your liking. But this is very important, especially for really critical things that you wouldn't want the AI agent to just do by itself. For number 13, we have data transformations. So data transformations is basically how we can change our data from one form to another, which is very useful sometimes when you're doing a lot of data extraction, trying to like format your data in a particular way. And coming here, I'm going to go over two methods that are more commonly used. So here we have an array. So an array is basically, here we have different strings enclosed in square brackets. And what I want to do is I want to change this array to a string. So to do that, we have another edit field set, and we just basically have to add the dot join. So I'm just going to do this again. We can just drag and drop our array over here. And after this, we just want to do dot join. So what this dot join does is it changes an array into a string. And in the middle here, we can put what we call delimiters, or basically just what we want to use to separate them in string form. So here by default, we have the commas. If you want it also, we can put them in new lines. So to put in new lines, we'll do backslash and we'll add an n over there. As you can see, now they're stacked like this. Everyone is on a new line. And if you want to put some more spaces in between them, you can add another dash n. If you want, you can add the word and with spaces in between. So that really helps you format your data however you want. And the next really cool thing, I'm just going to change this back to the commas, is that we can then change this from the string, so the individual words, back to the array. So that list bounded by those square brackets. So coming here to the next one, what we'd use is the dot split. So you just add that. So how we did it the first time, you drag and drop, and then you just do dot split. And it changed them back to an array. So very, very useful if you're doing any forms of data transformations like this. And for tip number 14, we have standardized inputs. So what that basically means is sometimes when we're working with inputs from different places or different types of inputs, they may come in different formats. So here in this scenario, we're getting documents, we're getting a voice recording, and we're getting a text file. So obviously they're not going to be in the same format. Like this is going to be text, this is probably going to be like audio, and this guy is probably going to be caption, which is like the data type for documents. So we want to make sure that you're in the same way to feed into our AI agents, because coming in our AI agents, it only accepts the dot text. And if this guy is dot caption and this guy is maybe probably dot text, because we use transcribe recording here. But if we're getting directly from here, it'd be something else. And then this guy is text. They are all in different data formats. I would not be able to go through this. And this is where the edit field sets come in, because we can simply drag the data from here. So here we drag the data here, and then we set it as text. So whatever data that's here, we capture it in a variable called text, so we can easily pass it back to our AI agent. Very, very important. So make sure you're always using that to make sure your data is being passed correctly. And next thing we have is specifying inputs to sub workflows. So what that looks like is, like here coming to our AI agent, we have all this that kind of look like send proposal agent, voice assistant agent, document upload agents. So these agents are hosted in another separate workflow. So let me show you an example of one. Coming over here, we can see the send proposal agent, which is like its own workflow. So anytime the personal assistant needs to send a proposal, it will call this workflow, which is over here, and it will be executed. And what I really want to go over here is how we can pass data from this sub workflow into this workflow. So I'm just going to come to a whole new workflow. And here we have the trigger we use for sub workflows. Coming into here, there are different ways you can pass data. We also have define using fields below. So here you can basically add a field. Let's say here we want name, we'll put the type, and we can add another field, or we can also use using JSON example. So there we basically put a JSON example of what we need. And the last one will be accept all data, which I don't usually do because it's not really structured. But basically what this does is that any data the AI agent has, it just blasts it into the next workflow. So coming back into our proposal agent, what this kind of looks like in practice is, for me, I usually use JSON example, and I basically just put out all the fields I want and just leave out an empty space. So when you then set up the other workflow here in the AI agent, it will ask you for those fields. So you can ask the AI agent to fill those during execution. And that looks like this over here. We can see service name, company name, email, chat ID, which is what we have here. Service name, company name, email, chat ID. So once you just connect this to this, it automatically asks you for all this information, so you can ensure that it's always being passed. So coming for our game changer number 16, we have default values. And what is really exciting about default values, how it basically works is, let's say when you give a dynamic value, and let's say it doesn't work, it doesn't go true, it just gives another value that the AI agent can run with or the workflow can run with, so it doesn't crash. So that kind of looks like this in practice. So I have this in one of my other workflows, the schedule call. So how this basically works is that the AI agent gives the workflow a particular time to call the client. Now, in the case that the AI agent doesn't give a particular time, we have a default value to call at the current time. So you can put anything inside there. You can put your own custom prompt. It also helps you when you're testing out something as well. So a very practical scenario of where this can be used, it can be used in any node at all. But let's say you're creating a workflow, you're just testing it out. And how this workflow works is, maybe it takes phone numbers from a Google Sheets and then it calls those phone numbers for a voice assistant. But when you're testing it out, you don't really want to be calling any random person or just calling people in your phone book. So you can just put a default phone number as your phone number until you're ready to then start using the dynamic phone number to make sure you can test out the workflow very well. So you can use this in different scenarios, but that is just one way it can be used. And that leads us directly to the now convention. So if you ever want to add the specific time in any of your workflows, like maybe you want to schedule a call and you want it to go through that exact moment, or you want to give your AI agent access to the exact time, we have this thing called now. So how this kind of looks like is you'd have the curly brackets and then you'd put a $sign and you have now. So that says the exact time at the present moment. And if you ever want to format your time in a particular way, you can add the dot format and you can format it like year, month, day, just like that. But I want you to note something. This now is the now for whatever time zone your workflow is in. So what that means is coming over here to your settings, you can check what time zone it's in. So for me right now, I'm in American New York, so that's correct. But let's say you're in the UK and it's set to American New York, it would give you America/New York time, not the time in the UK. So when using that, you always want to make sure you come here and you set out the correct time to make sure it works properly. And for tip number 18, we have the code node. So right now I don't have any code in here, but this is very, very, very important, especially when you're trying to make really complex, powerful workflows, or you're just trying to have more customizability. I know it's more like no code, but knowing the code and no code is really effective because then you have more power over your automation. So looking here, the languages here are JavaScript and Python, which is basically all you need. You just have to learn those two and you'll be good to go. So I highly recommend you at least take like a beginner's fundamentals course on these so you can have a lot of control over your workflow. So you never have the situation like, oh, n8n doesn't have this, so I can't do this. Just come put it in the code node and you'll be good to go. And coming to number 19, we have the structured output parser. And how this works is sometimes we want our AI agent to give us our output in a particular format. So just showing you how this works, looking at our AI agent here, we have the system message as your helpful assistant that describes vacation activities for people. And to make sure this output parser works, we want this requires specific output format to be toggled green. And we want to come here to structured output parser. And we want the schema types to be generated from JSON example. So what that basically means is that the output is going to give us is going to be similar to this. So it's going to take this as an example to then create more outputs in the future. And what we basically want here, we want the activity separate and we want the description as well. So coming back to our AI agent, I just want to make sure that this is connect chat trigger node because we added a trigger node. And I want to delete this so we can get the response in the trigger node. So coming here, let's test out this and see how it works. And here we can see it gives us the example as we need. But the most important thing is just having to be able to separate this into individual objects. So if we want to process that later on inside our workflow, we can just drag and drop this as individual objects. And here for number 20, we have when to use an AI agent versus when to just use a usual message model. So I know sometimes it could be really tempting to use a really fancy, really powerful AI agent where you can like add all the tools, add everything. But there's some use cases that you don't really need to do all that. And you just need to feed in some data and then get some output. In that case, this would be the better option because it's less complex. You have less API calls, which is way more cheaper, and you just get your thing faster as well. But with the AI agent, you have to call all the tools. You have to figure out how to configure all the APIs. So I say if it's not absolutely necessary, then you should just opt in for this lesser version. If you're ever doing the really powerful, really complex stuff, then you should definitely go for the AI agent. And that is it, 20 n8n game changers I wish I knew at the start of my journey. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you have any questions at all, make sure you leave them for me in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.